I work on business development at cities in the Americas. And again, thank you for your time. So without further ado, let's get to the content. So the elevator industry is a dynamic ecosystem with checks and balances to provide safe and efficient vertical transportation solutions. So on the one side, we have building owners that are providing such service to building tenants and the general public. Now, that said, there is a regulatory framework in place with regulators and authorities having jurisdiction, which helps provide those checks and balances. And that also is aligned with or helps keep in line the objectives from the building owners on the left-hand side and the building tenants and the general public on the right-hand side. So for the building owners, they really are keen on managing their cost, abiding by the regulations, and maintaining a good service level so that they can provide a good service. On the right-hand side, for the building tenants and the general public, what's important in terms of vertical transportation is availability of the service, have a safe and comfortable ride, which leads to a positive customer experience from a real estate standpoint. Now, in doing so, like we said, the building owners must comply with an evolving regulation in several aspects, which is normally defined by the SME codes, as we know, and that vary by different authorities having jurisdiction. In this case, we see a map with a summary or an attempt to a summary by state, but we see that there's a lot of variation, and the probability that if you're a large building owner, let's say on the East Coast or throughout the country, the likelihood that you have multiple and diverging requirements from a regulatory standpoint is very high. So you need to know what are your requirements, you need to abide by those. Now, to achieve that, the building owners work with multiple service providers. So we have maintenance providers, inspectors, telecom providers, and call center providers in terms of emergency communications. And oftentimes, they also work with consultants and building operators to help them be effective on how they provide that vertical transportation solution. This effectively builds an ecosystem where there's multiple players, all within a regulatory framework that's varying by location. Now, emergency communications, which is the gist or the main key point here, is an evolving topic, and the requirements themselves and the expectations from the end users are evolving to adopt what we call today, everyday technologies. For example, you need to have a hands-free communication device. You may have a requirement that the incoming emergency communications do not need someone to actually answer when you're in the cab, but they will be incoming directly without any interaction from the users, for example. Or you may have a requirement to have a video feed from the cab itself for authorized personnel and emergency personnel to be accessible to them, along with two-way communications for voice and text, for example. So we see that these requirements continue to evolve with the goal in mind to provide a better safety, faster emergency response, and improve the customer experience, which makes it more inclusive also for people with disabilities. So it all makes sense, but it's getting complex and let's say, challenging for building owners to keep up and be up to par. Now, all of that is happening within a context where the prevailing technology with analog phone lines or plain old telephone services is being phased out. So what that means is that the ecosystem really needs to evolve in order to provide those safe and efficient vertical transportation solutions that everyone is interested in. So for the building owners, we've seen that managing cost is one of their priorities, but it's hard to do in terms of emergency communications when you have POTS line costs between 100 and 300 per line per month because of the technology that's being phased out. And carriers no longer have to abide by some of the long-standing, let's say, regulations in that market. Now, the technology itself of analogic lines using the copper lines, it's sometimes insufficient for the requirements that the building owner needs to abide by, depending on the region that they're in. And there's ever more, increasing expectations in terms of response times to be faster, which makes it harder to maintain a service level. And on the right-hand side, for the building tenants and the general public, their priorities remain the same: availability, safety, and customer experience. Now, as a building owner, you may consider different options to replace these old telephone lines. You'll probably find that cellular is one of the best ways to go about that. And that's your prerogative. That's where you work within your ecosystem to figure out what is the best solution for you. But now, what if we could go beyond the emergency communications? What if we could somehow streamline the building operations, provide better maintenance service, and visualize or have a better understanding of how each elevator is operating? What if we could leverage the true value or the true potential of the elevator data that we can generate? In that case, then the ecosystem would be evolving, because by making data available across up and down the ecosystem, it drives value for the different, let's say, players within the ecosystem, which in general will benefit the building tenants' experience. Now we have a dynamic ecosystem, but now empowered by data from a single source of truth, which is important to make it comparable, consistent, and useful over time. So enter EComgard, which is the product from cities. It's really a data hub, which is ASME 17.1 2019 and above compliant. And it's really a data hub that allows us to combine voice, text, video, plus the IoT data that we're already capturing, or that we can capture from the elevator system itself, which is regarding operational metrics of how the machine is operating in its location, right? By doing that, we have an agnostic system, which means regardless of the brand that you have, regardless of the age of the elevator, and regardless of the configuration, let's say, that you have, as long as you have a biparting door, this kind of system can help you combine the emergency communications with the operational metrics from the equipment. There's two main components into this solution. So one component is the controller for the safety edges or the light curtains, which actually integrates the 2D and the 3D solution into itself. And then that component, let's say, which is an integral part of the elevator today, communicates via the traveling cable with the larger box that you see here, which is the EComgard data hub, that combines all these data sources and then allows to communicate that out to the cloud. So there's those two, let's say, main components. Now, of course, depending on your specific building configuration and CAD configuration, you may need additional options. So I mentioned the 2D and 3D option in terms of door reopening requirements, but you may also have front and rear, for example, like in this case, option and need for that, in which case everything remains the same, plus you get an extension mode so that the front and rear configuration can be communicated to the controller, and then through the traveling cable communicate to the main EComgard box, let's call it, or the main unit. Now, within the cab itself, of course, in terms of emergency communications, I mentioned some of the requirements are about voice, about video, about text bidirectionally within the cabin or from the cabin to the call center, let's say. The controller now allows for doing that. So you have a power over Ethernet connection for your camera, a power over Ethernet connection for your emergency dialer, and then you have an Ethernet connection to the video screen. Now, that said, it all travels again through the traveling cable, which is normally an existing connection, so you don't have to worry too much about that. to, in this case, it's a traction elevator, let's say, communicating to the machine room here, and then via LTE, or you could do via, wide area network, or one network if you want. But let's say via LTE, transmitting the data, communications, emergency communications, and IoT data to the cloud, where it is analyzed, and then from there, from the cloud, it goes to the call center for the emergency communication response. Now, we are aware that there's multiple options that you may have, right, and multiple different requirements where you may have a specific connection to your, let's say, within building system. So there's integrations we have to look at in more detail, because it depends. Sometimes we would need additional connectivity from a third party or a different configuration, but that can all be looked into. Now, you keep your flexibility as a building owner, as a consultant, to recommend whichever call center you may want to use. Now, if you're a service provider that have enough scale and you have your own call center that you can provide that service for emergency response, you can do that as well. So we're just enabling the whole ecosystem to figure out what makes the most sense on each situation. Now I have to do a shameless marketing plug about the United Conference upcoming in Atlantic City in September 22nd to the 26th. We will have a fully working operating system of EComgard by cities at our booth, which is booth 115, number 115. So please stop by. We'll be happy to show you the technical aspects. Clearly, I'm not a technical person, like I mentioned at the beginning. I'm the business development guy. So I know there may be a lot of questions about the technical aspects of it. We're more than happy to answer those. If not during this presentation, follow up with you separately, but also encourage you to visit us at our booth number 115 at the United NAC, upcoming NAC convention in Atlantic City. So with that, let's say that's how the technology works from a standpoint. Again, you have the option for just 2D or 3D, depending on your regulatory requirements, or if you want to get ready for the future, you can do that and future-proof your building by starting with 3D altogether, and then you can have, single door or front and rear configuration or front and side, whatever it is. So you have options. Now, what it looks like in terms of the end-to-end services, you have an installation where you install the sensors that are capturing the, let's say, operational metrics of the elevator. And in our case, we have embedded additional sensors within the light curtains or the safety edges, which allows us to closely monitor the door behavior, which for us is very important because, as we know, the majority of the callbacks, let's say 70 to 80% of the callbacks that require someone to act on the field, on the machine or on the elevator to bring it back into operation, are derived from issues with the door system. So that's why we're embedding the doors. And we have a 3D option, like I mentioned before. And when you connect that with the EComgard or the emergency communication solution, then you create this data hub to send all the voice, text, video, and IoT data via the LTE signal to the cloud, where it is analyzed, right, and stored, and then provided in a system to monitor the behavior of the elevator, but also a different system if you need to answer and manage your emergency calls, right? If you have that with a different provider, you can do that. Or you could use whatever your, let's say, service provider does for you today. Now, that's what the, let's say, architecture, if you will, looks like. Maybe a reminder, we talked about this on our last webinar, but it also includes advanced people flow solution, because, like I said, the fact of being in the light curtain allows us to measure, for example, acceleration, capture how the, let's say, shape or pattern of whatever goes through the door looks like, and then we can identify, therefore, what is the cabin traffic across the shaft in terms of floors and across time, right? So with that, we can really have a deeper understanding and gain insight into how the building is being used, and especially in the return to COVID, where we see, I think, Chicago is about 70% occupation rate on commercial real estate, compared to 2019 levels. I think New York and LA, if I'm not mistaken, or Atlanta were closer to 90%, right? So we see people are coming back, but not everyone's coming back. It's not going to go back to the levels that we saw before. But this type of information will be helpful for a building owner or a building operator to perhaps also make more efficient their HVAC operation, for example, or enhance safety as needed, right? And also to optimize, for example, the way you're using your elevator system overall, because you can reduce wait times by increasing throughput and balancing loads across, let's say, a duplex configuration. Sometimes those are off and not relatively often looked into because we didn't have the data before, but now we have data to make, therefore, a better use of the time that the technicians have on site. Here are some benefits of unlocking the power of the elevator data. I'm not going to go through all of it, but the idea is that by having data, we're empowering the ecosystem with one source of data, one truth, to have data-based conversations that are, and it's data that's near real time, so allows you to take or make decisions and plan for better maintenance, for example. It gives you a holistic view of your portfolio because you can compare across the different, let's say, units that you have deployed. And it also leads to better operational efficiency, like I mentioned, when you understand how the building is being used. And all of that should lead to increased retention because it ensures good or better tenant experience. And it opens the opportunity to new revenue streams. For example, in this case, if you are a service provider of maintenance, you can then take on the revenue stream that would come from a traditional POTS line, let's say, provider or telecoms provider, grab that stream of revenue within your business and also provide the building owner or the operator with a single contact, let's say, or a single partner to discuss anything that's related with the elevator. Because today, there's a lot of complexity in terms of vendors that have to deal with vertical transportation within the building. Communications, for example, being one of the cases where you have to have different people to figure out what's going on. With this, you could centralize everything within your maintenance service provider, which would make it for a stickier relationship from a maintenance provider standpoint, and then providing the building owner or the operators with a more streamlined vendor management landscape, let's say. Now, the last part, and I know we're 9:20, so I want to have some space for questions and discussion, is sample business case, I guess, from a provider standpoint. And we have done some of these in the past. If you were at NAC during the spring conference, this has a similar flavor to it, but the interesting piece is that the relative importance of the different aspects that drive value for the service provider is changed. Precisely for what I just mentioned, and item number 2, the monthly monitoring fee will go beyond just like the IoT data. It can go into the emergency communications monthly fee, which we mentioned it was about $100 to $300 per month per elevator, right? I'm not saying that's what's going to be charged. It depends on the on each specific deal, but that would be one important source of additional revenue, which is recurring revenue for the service provider, for example. With this, let's say, solution, we're enabling that. So you have the hardware sales, right? And you have more hardware now because you're talking about cameras, you're talking about maybe replacing some dialers if you have to, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have potential impact on your current business, which is modernization on repair and reducing the churn in terms of cancellations over time. And you'll see those are moderate for year 1, which is what I'm showing here on this stacked bar chart on the right. And then the cost efficiency or cost avoidance opportunities in terms of callback savings, that's a big one because you will have information ahead of time to allow you to provide better maintenance and not only reactive, but better preventive. And we all have the the hope of getting to predictive maintenance, right? It's early days for that, but the idea is that the more data we have, the better we'll get at it, and then the more enabling we can do for service providers to get there. And then on the other side, you have the costs. So you have a hardware cost, a deployment cost, and the subscription fees that the service provider would need to incur, which are fully covered, more than covered by the monitoring fee, to be honest. And we have some net benefits here. So this portfolio with a deployment schedule like so over 3 years. And then you can see here the return on investment. So it is a positive return on investment right from year one. And here you have 400,000, these in thousands of dollars, all the way to like 4 million over 3 years cumulative. So this is just an example from the service provider side of things. And with that, I think we get to the final point, which is what are the top 5 takeaways for EComgard and mixing, emergency communications or augmenting emergency communications with IoT data. Is number 1 is the cross ecosystem benefits. So we have for the building owners and operators, vendor management that's simplified. You build your partnership with your service provider. You get data transparency that will allow consultants to do a better job in helping, guard for the interest of the building owners in that relationship. And then also creating new sources of revenue for providers, for example, the maintenance providers, where they can take over some of the, let's say, communication or emergency communication fees that today are going to a traditional carrier, right? Which really don't have a purview of what the elevator is and what needs to be done in terms of keeping the elevator safe and operating efficiently. It is an agnostic solution for the entire portfolio. So that provides you with consistent operational metrics, which is important from a building owner and operator standpoint, but also from a maintenance provider standpoint. It is compliant with ASME 17.1, depending on where you're at. You may need a 2D or a 3D solution for door reopening, plus the emergency communications. And it can be easily installed by any technician. This is nothing relatively new. It's nothing that is not part of the elevator, let's say, today. And it's something that technicians in general are already trained to do, especially on the light cord installation piece. They do that every day. Now, this enables data-driven maintenance and hopefully getting to predictive maintenance, especially focusing on the elevator doors and their behavior. And it provides also insight into how the building is being used in terms of people flow. So those would be the 5 things that we would like to highlight about EComgard. And now with that, I'll turn it over to Alexandra, who's going to help us with the Q&A session. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to attend today. And again, a reminder, last shameless marketing plug about the United Conference in Atlantic City. Join us at booth 115. We will also be talking on the 24th about using change management to succeed in a data-driven world. So that's going to be a session that we will be participating in. So with that, Alexandra, turning it over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Seidemann. I've been watching in the background a little bit the technical side of things. So everything went well. Thank you, Santiago, for the great presentation. So we have just enabled your microphones and cameras. So feel free to actually just talk, or if you don't like to just pop the questions into the chat. Let's open the Q&A session.
Someone's typing in the chat box. The question is EComgard only for new construction? No, not necessarily. You can use it also in your repair and modernization business. Of course, we know that the requirements on each side may be different from, let's say, AHJ standpoint. But you could use this because it's A17.1 2019 compliant in terms of door reopening and emergency communications, and above that as well, right? In terms of newer requirements. So you could do this for new install, for modernization, for repairs. Can we get a copy of
Okay.
your slides? Uh, yeah, I think we can make sure that we get that to you, David. I think you asked. So the people that attended the session, we can provide you with a copy of the slides. And if you have any, deeper questions in terms of the technical aspects or in terms of the business aspects, we're happy to follow up with a session and schedule either before the NAC convention or during or after, depending on what works. So the answer would be yes.
Yes, and you will also be getting a recording of this webinar, so you can have a
Ah,
second
even
look.
even better or worse, depending on how I did. But yeah.
You did well, don't worry.
Um, any other question? Does anyone have anything in their mind that wanna discuss? Um, I guess in terms of the installation times and things like that, it really depends on what your configuration is, not only from the cabin itself, but also from the building, right? The example that we saw was for a traction elevator. On a hydro elevator, you may need to have a different location if the machine room doesn't have the best connectivity from a cellular standpoint, but we can take it at the top of the throttle, things like that. So we can discuss more in more detail if you have any questions on that. But wanted to point that out. It varies really a lot. In our business case, we have some assumptions there that we can discuss. And if you're interested, we can sit down with you and build a business case that is specific to your business, to your situation, either from a building owner standpoint, from a service maintenance provider, right? Um, or from a consultant standpoint as well. We're happy to work with you to build that up and have a deeper conversation as needed and as you are available.